in this lovely, terrific, beautiful venue. I'd like to first call up my good friend and president of Framingham State University, Javier Savalas.
Thank you, Senator. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome you to this beautiful place that we have. I'm on Google Technology, I don't know what I did. That we have next to Senator Spilka. That's the work. It's me? No? Now?
Hello?
Okay, is this work? Does the microphone have something against Spanish accents? I don't know, maybe. I was going to say, thanks again to Senator Spilka for allowing Framingham State to have this place. And also thanks to her for her vision about bringing this group together tonight. It is such a vision. I was talking to Jill a few minutes ago about... Oh. It's Saturday Night Live. I was talking to Jill about how important it is to see what people not say, but what people do. And that is something that Senator Spilka has always done. She has made a big difference, caring about everyone in society, especially about children and how children will be the future of our society, understanding how everybody is different and how people will develop, learn in different ways, understanding the different learning styles. Framingham State University, as you know, is the oldest public teachers college in the nation, the oldest normal school in the nation. And the first president of Framingham State, Cyrus Peirce, was convinced that rote memorization and single styles of learning didn't work. So already in 1839, he was thinking about making sure that learning was interactive and available to all. So the long trajectory we have had about learning and learning styles really is a part of our culture. So I'm delighted that Framingham State is part of this. I know that I see Representative Jack Lewis in the back. I'd like to welcome him and thank him. He's also Framingham State. And I think that our new mayor of Framingham is here as well, Dr. Spicer and we look forward to many projects. And I think I want to pass the microphone to Senator Spilka because it's going to work for her.
Please give a round once again for Javier. Well, Javier really worked with me in order to get the Lawrence Center in Framingham State's possession because of his vision of what it can be for Metro West, not just Framingham State, not just Framingham or Ashland, but for greater Metro West and the state as a whole, and what an incredible property and vision this is, consistent with his vision for Framingham State. So thank you for all that you do as well. I do just want to say, and I'll try to be somewhat brief, but I want to thank you for coming here. It's great to see so many people on a day that, today I woke up and I felt like I was in Florida. It was so warm that it was great. So thank you for being here, and I hope that you will learn a lot, enjoy the panel of experts that we have presenting here today, and just take with you some new tools for social and emotional learning. We have the Rennie Center here and the Excel Coalition. The Rennie Center, for those that may not be aware, is a nationally known education think tank, and their mission is to help improve public education, which is the same mission that all of you, the reason you're here is because it's your mission as well. And they help do it and drive the improvement through informed decision-making based on cutting-edge issues, diving really deep into the knowledge, the expertise of people, and presenting to folks that are in the position to make public policy and are really at the top of the education decision-making. I want to thank all of the superintendents. I wish I could announce all of you here. I saw some town managers, as town administrators, parents, schools, principals. If I did, we'd take another 10 minutes, but it really is great to have you all here, and I want to thank you so much. I do just want to mention that we are blessed. We have Maria Mercedes here. I'd like to acknowledge Maria. She is the Massachusetts Child Advocate, so if there are issues concerning children, Maria and her staff are smack in the middle of it all, doing a great job investigating and helping drive policy, good public policy, so thank you. And I do just want to take a moment to introduce Brian Prescott, a Hopkinton high school history teacher who actually interned in my office on his time off. That's what he did as his break. And it was great having him, and we keep in touch. And he's here with Megan, Tara, Luke, and Young, who are Hopkinton High School student government students here to learn. So hopefully, you may learn from them as well. So I just want to say my goal, I have a Metro West Kids initiative that's been ongoing for like the last 2 years or so. And the whole idea is to identify strategies to help all of our children across Metro West. What can we do to help raise healthy, strategic, resilient kids in our Metro West and beyond? We do it through school, we do it in families and parenting, we do it in community groups, and it really does, to use the phrase, take a village, take a community to do this. So we are trying in my office to provide resources and tools to parents, to school committees, to principals and superintendents, and whoever else might be interested to help share the resources, the experts, when you may not know exactly who to go to, and help provide some of these strategies and tools, and then decide if this is the beginning of a foundation that maybe, particularly in the schools, you might want to pull on and grow and implement more and develop, particularly with this, a social and emotional learning curriculum. We all know that the schools these days, and I will say it, focuses on academia so much, and they should. We want our kids to learn and to be able to be self-sustaining and support themselves. But there is, because of, I believe anyway, because of the push and the emphasis on testing and making sure that kids do well with the tests, we have gone away from the social and emotional learning aspect of school. I had a long talk with somebody today about recess and how we've gone away from recess. And I swear, having recess in my elementary school helped me be state senator. I learned collaboration, negotiation. I learned to back off a little bit. I used to play with a lot of the boys in elementary school. So I'd be out there in the softball team and learning how to interact and, just so many of the skills that you learn with recess. You also let off steam. And we have such a big, obesity epidemic with our kids now for so many reasons. But these are things, whether we do it or not, I think it's really important to have a discussion and debate and be much more aware of some of these issues, because it's so much, it's just as important, I believe, as the academic aspect of school. So I am going to cut to we'll hear not only from the Rennie Center and Jennifer Poulos, the Associate Director. We have about the Excellence Through Social and Emotional Learning Coalition we'll learn about, which is a network that brings together school districts across Massachusetts to design and implement programs to promote SEL, social and emotional learning. We have Deborah Bromfield, Director of Student Services, Canton Public Schools. Thank you for coming. At least there's no snow tonight. Last year there was. Rachel Engler-Bennett, Associate Commissioner, Student and Family Support, Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Richard Fournier, Director of District Partnerships in Transforming Education. I look forward to hearing from all of these folks. I look forward to hearing, hopefully there's time for question and answers as well. And let us know, let Pooja, do you want to stand up? Who's really organized it. She's the one that should get the round of applause. Thank you. Let us know if there's something more or different that we can help all of you do and provide. That's really important. Look to us as a resource. Whatever we can do, we can look into and find what we need to or who we need to help make your jobs hopefully a little bit easier. So thank you again for coming. I'd like to invite you all up. Turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Senator Spalding, for the invitation for tonight, the wonderful welcome. We have a number of just overview remarks that will talk a little bit about the research that the Rennie Center has done on the socio-emotional learning issue, and then we're going to quickly move into a panel of my esteemed colleagues here representing the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Transform Ed, and Canton Public Schools. So just before we begin some of the content, just a note on the Rennie Center. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent think tank. Our founder, former Secretary of Education Paul Reville, founded us with the mission of providing better evidence on work that schools and districts across the Commonwealth are taking on to put that in the hands of policymakers to improve decision-making in the interest of student learning. We have a history of really attacking issues of student learning, often defined by college and career readiness, and that's actually where our interest in socio-emotional learning came from. Over a number of studies that focused on how to reduce the dropout rate, how to increase the students from all communities obtaining a Massachusetts public high school diploma, and what kinds of alternative education practices were out there. We heard time and time again from educators across the Commonwealth, we got the academics, it's the social and the emotional that we need help with. So after we had done probably the 5th report on what it takes to not only get past the goalpost of a high school diploma, but enroll in college and persist, we sort of took on this issue headlong. So why socio-emotional learning? And I know many of you attended the event last year and are very passionate about this issue. And we'll hear these sentiments echoed from many of our panels tonight. The notion is that social emotional learning, well, all learning is both social and emotional in nature. It really grounds academic learning to be able to speak to the way that students learn in exercising the full cognitive range of abilities that a student has in the classroom. So the notion that we can just do academic learning, or that we can just do it without speaking to that child's social and emotional functioning processes may actually just be siloing that student's abilities. We know that these skills come with a lot of different names, whether it be soft skills, 21st century skills, career ready skills. They're probably the same range of interpersonal and intrapersonal skills that the Castle framework, which is, I know, familiar to many of you who joined us last year, really seek to capture. The notion that things like relationship building, social awareness, self-awareness really define how we learn about how we learn, and how even our youngest students can develop the kind of skills that make them not only better in the classroom, better to manage their own stress, better able to respond to emotional and behavioral triggers, and be more successful. It was going to happen to me too, through their academic career as they approach college and start to make career decisions. The notion here is that much of our research about socio-emotional learning is grounded in this Castle framework and these 5 sets of skills. You'll hear different interpretations of these skills tonight. So I call your attention to this now and challenge you to think about, again, how we'll sort of integrate this in our comments as we begin our panel. So one reflection before we jump into some of the research findings that we have from a national report that we conducted about 3 years ago is this notion of how to integrate socio-emotional learning. And this is actually from one of the national leads that spoke to us at length about why socio-emotional learning is important, and it's going to be our framing and a framework for our work tonight. Socio-emotional learning isn't something else on the plate. It isn't some new initiative. It isn't some new directive. It is not going to turn into a new accountability mechanism or framework. This is our plate. Once you get the plate established, everything else flourishes. But it also brings up a really interesting question. How do we make it flourish in our districts, in our schools, in our classrooms across the Commonwealth? So the research that the Rennie Center conducted in 2015 was a national scan of how state policy has operationalized around socio-emotional learning in pretty much every other state besides Massachusetts. Some have different approaches like state standards, some approach it differently through putting it into packaging it with academics, some have separate strands on like character education that address socio-emotional learning. What we really zeroed in on is in the essence of trying to give advice to practitioners across the Commonwealth. How would you do social-emotional learning if you were sort of starting from scratch? Not many places, not many communities across the Commonwealth are, but what would you do to really sort of build a socio-emotional learning approach? And we'll hear a lot about that from our panelists. So we really sort of had 4 key steps. First, socio-emotional learning needs to be prioritized and needs to be prioritized at the leadership level. Given this notion that all learning is socio-emotional, we need to think about where to integrate socio-emotional learning in the traditional notion of the academic production function. Can we have it in our classrooms? Why and why not? How does it sort of get integrated into important documents like a district strategic plan and important notions of the superintendent's priorities and goals? And when we were doing this research in 2015, this was not necessarily to the leadership level it is now, and we will continue to sort of highlight how it can continue to grow. Next, like all student learning needs, there are a set of resources in each district that need to be tagged to social-emotional learning to really sort of make it thrive. So ingredients matter, whether that be professional development, whether that be additional budget resources, whether that be staffing, whether that be instructional materials like a curriculum, like additional classroom materials that get distributed, whether that be just the nuts and bolts of how to run a classroom, need to be considered when we think about the integration of socio-emotional learning into a classroom. Some of the districts across the country are thinking about how to fund socio-emotional learning from a district operating line. Some are funding it from grant funds. The notion here isn't that where the resources come from matter. It's just that the cornucopia of resources that it takes to integrate socio-emotional learning do need to get addressed. Again, whether it's in a professional development plan, whether it's in a staffing plan, whether it requires additional expertise that some of the, whether it be members of your district or members of the community, can bring to bear. Next, integration. And we've said a little bit about this already, but let me say a few words more. So the notion that socio-emotional learning exists as a different column in a spreadsheet is not a strategy for success. The notion that, again, skills like self-management, social awareness, and relationship building can be conducted within an academic activity is more of the cutting-edge kind of implementation that is beginning to evolve as we all bring more expertise and passion to this issue. And I know that I'm going to pause here because I know my colleague Richard Fournier from Transform Ed is going to speak to this specifically, but just thinking about how a writer's workshop activity in a kindergarten classroom, a science experiment in a 6th grade lab, or a writing assignment in a 10th grade English literature class may actually focus on those 5 skill dimensions that I brought up as part of the CASEL dimensions as much as it can on academic skills. So that writer's workshop in kindergarten may focus on some elements of self-awareness, like what kind of storyteller am I when I talk about this particular narrative that I'm writing. In that 6th grade experiment, it might be about the relationship building that is done as we explore some inquiry methods around a chemistry experiment. I could go on and on with these examples, but the notion really is how do you sort of blur that line between the academic and the socio-emotional, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that the Excel districts are doing in this same regard. And then finally, measure and evaluate. You knew this slide was going to be in here somewhere, right? So the notion we need to determine which skills matter, and then develop ways to monitor and track them in ways that speak about student growth. So don't get us wrong, we know that sort of the notion that what gets measured is what matters, and that often points us in a very straight line fashion to some student performance data. That's not totally the message here. The message here is just as we want to grow academic skills, we want to grow our students' socio-emotional learning skills, and knowing what to grow comes from analyzing data on what skills and capacities students already have, what they're getting better at, and what they need to continue to have help with. So again, a lot of measurement techniques are going to get talked about across our panel today, but the notion is we are all much better in the education sector about working with data than we were 5 to 10 or even 15 years ago. How do we think about the kinds of data that tell us about whether students are better self-managers than they were maybe a semester ago, and use that as part of the ways we think about their performance and growth in schools. So as we move forward, this is maybe Throwback Tuesday. So we released this report in November of 2015. It means we did most of our research for the report during the 13-14 and 14-15 school year. At that time, we focused on 3 districts who were really sort of jumping in with 2 feet on this issue of socio-emotional learning. So just a quick tour around Massachusetts to sort of talk about some of the strategies that these districts were using at that time that may refresh your practice or really sort of present some innovative ideas about socio-emotional learning. So first, in Fall River, Massachusetts, they had received a state grant to really focus on wraparound support, specifically in the early ed sector. They had used a lot of this focus to redefine school readiness as a function of both literacy, math, and also socio-emotional learning skill capacity. So the notion that that socio-emotional learning definition would be incorporated into the school readiness definition, and really started to work as a community coalition to spread knowledge about what it means to be school ready in the socio-emotional learning dimension. Moving to Ready, they have a community-wide coalition that has been really focused on substance abuse issues and some of the outgrowth of the opioid crisis in the community. That community coalition made sure that top of their partner list was Reading Public Schools, and how to think about the kinds of supports that can be shared between a community-wide coalition, largely focusing on substance abuse, and the kinds of skills and capacities that might be really great to have in schools that might be preventative and also trauma-facing at the same time. So sort of wrapping that community coalition around the public schools. And then finally, Gardner, Mass., who focused on this from a professional development angle. Thinking here that educators who are first line responders in some ways to the trauma that is part of some of the culture of our schools we need to be taking care of our educators as well, and sort of thinking about some of the kinds of ways that the socio-emotional competency of educators can be attended to as we think through the socio-emotional learning competence of our students. So training teachers to train other teachers at working, again, as building level teams on issues of socio-emotional learning, and again, building community capacity in that school building for socio-emotional learning and knowledge. So where do we go from here? Well, this, again, report released in November of 2015. It caught the eye of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents and School Committees, as well as the Massachusetts School Administrators Association. And they asked the Rennie Center, along with our trusted partner Transform Ed, to sort of think through how to work with Massachusetts districts on some of the kinds of socio-emotional learning needs that they had. From that partnership of the two organizations and the associations, we've since formed the Excel Network, which through a competitive application process identified 9 districts stretching from North Shore, Boxford, Topsfield, out west to Fitchburg, down south to Brockton, and all the way to the Chatham and Harwich on the Cape. So a very big diversity of districts that all committed to working on issues of classroom level integration for socio-emotional learning. Thinking through the notion that, and my slide skipped here just a little bit, that an expanded definition of student success, a shift in instructional practices and culture, combined with the training, tools, and data needed, would really sort of transform socio-emotional learning into a key tool for ensuring student success in school and their ability to be college and career ready. We are focusing, and you'll hear a lot about this work from both Richard and our colleague Deb Bromfield from Canton Public Schools, on the notion that in any given case, social-emotional learning approaches can inform trauma, they can inform culture and climate of a school, and they can also, again, influence classroom-level instruction as we sort of pay particular attention to these intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. Our desire with the Excel Network is to really sort of focus on SEL skills in the classroom. How do you, again, continue to blur that line between what is the academic and what is the socio and emotional? So we are working with these 9 districts throughout this current academic school year to help them work on a SEL integration plan. And one more time, Deb Bromfield, joining us from Canton tonight, will sort of talk through some of the work that the network is doing vis-a-vis some of their priorities. I'd like to sort of pause here actually to move to our panel and invite them to the table where we'll sort of start a more robust discussion of some of the socio-emotional learning strategies and priorities from each of their organizations. But maybe I can take a few questions just on any of the content that we presented here as our panelists transition to the table. Any questions before we begin our panel? Okay, I think I'm just going to do a quick round of introductions of our panelists, and let's begin a conversation about socio-emotional learning priorities. Thank you. So before I sit, I'm just going to introduce our panelists because it's going to be easier for me to do that before I sit down. So to my immediate left is Richard Fournier. He's the Director of District Partnerships for Transform Ed, an organization headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, that is focused on socio-emotional learning mindsets, habits, and growth. And he's going to talk a little bit about some of their nationally facing work. To his left is Rochelle Engler-Bennett, who is an Associate Commissioner of Student Supports. Did I get that right? Students and Family Support at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. She also co-chairs the state's Safe and Supportive Schools Commission. Thank you. And to her left is Deb Bromfield, who's the Director of Student Supports for the Canton Public Schools. And I I will be sort of posing a set of questions to each of them, but we'll quickly move through that and open up a round of question and answer for the audience as well. So thank you. So Rochelle, I'd love to start with you this evening and hear a little bit about your perspective as a member of the department. What are some of the greatest needs and challenges facing students that you hear about from educators across the state? And what are some of the ways that the department has begun to think about priorities that align with these? It's a big question, but I know you're ready to jump in.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having us all and having this event. And thank you, Senator Stroker, for all your leadership. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has heard from quite a number in the field over the years and has been self-reflective as well. And we've heard some of what you've already heard tonight in terms of needs related to students who have experienced trauma, students who have been battling anxiety and depression, and then sort of daily needs of students to be successful in terms of schoolwork, in terms of navigating social relationships with peers, with adults at school, with family members and others, and then in terms of skills to be able to be successful in the workplace, as well as civic participation, and ultimately, in terms of the K-12 system, being able to prepare to be successful in post-secondary education. So we've, just one data point is through our youth risk behavior survey, we had, for high school students, approximately 1/4 of the students report that they had felt sad and hopeless for more than 2 weeks. And that was, that's just one data point with many, where there's quite a number of students who are struggling and facing many barriers to learning, as well as just the daily skills we all need to be successful. So the department has been listening and reflecting and also considering what Senator Spilka mentioned in terms of hearing from the field of interest in greater emphasis from the department in this realm. So we have been refining our strategic priorities and have identified supporting social emotional learning, health, and safety as one of our 5 core strategies. And we have social emotional learning as one of the core areas of focus. We have taken on a number of initiatives specifically related to supporting social emotional learning. I won't go into great detail, but I'll mention that we have engaged with the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning. Those of you who were here last year heard from Red Cross from that organization. They have a Collaborating States initiative, so we've been participating with that. And as part of that initiative, we have undertaken a few specific projects, like updating our guidelines on implementing social and emotional learning. We've included guiding principles on social and emotional learning in our revised mathematics and ELA curriculum frameworks. We've also taken the approach to integrate and align throughout many initiatives support for social and emotional learning. I'm happy to go through more examples, but I'll pause there.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to move to Deb Ronfield from Canton Public Schools next. Deb, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your district and the district's priority, how it's placed a priority on socio-emotional learning. We know that you are, just from getting to know you as part of the Excel network, that you've articulated some specific both student and educator learning goals for SEL. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that work and some of its roots.
And thank you all for having us here today. And, 8 years ago, we identified that student attendance and student behavior were areas of need of our attention. And as we paid attention to student attendance, we discovered that students' avoidance of school was multifaceted. Issues included, but were not limited to, bullying, anxiety, poor social skills, lack of self-esteem, mental health, truancy, and academic challenges. And as we began to address each of these issues, we determined that our work would need to be in the area of social emotional learning, and so began our work in this direction, and we progressed over the last 8 years.
Great. So we're going to go to Richard Fournier next. So you bring an interesting vantage point to tonight's conversation, sort of working nationally on issues of socio-emotional learning outside the Commonwealth with some leader districts and states that have really sort of sought out a focus on this issue, both from an implementation perspective, but a measurement one too. So what do you think is some of the most interesting work being done in districts, again, across the country, to advance SEL as a priority?
That's a good question. There's so much stuff, there's so much around SEL going on around throughout the U.S. The efforts I'd probably point to as the most interesting are with the core districts in California. My organization started working with the core districts back in 2013, and basically around that time, 6 or so superintendents in California from very large urban districts. So we're talking about Los Angeles, San Francisco, Fresno, Santa Ana, Oakland, and a few others. These superintendents got together and they basically said, look, we want to expand the definition of student success to include social and emotional skills along with many other items as well, put more emphasis on culture and climate. So they together, along with Bar Help and a couple other organizations, curated a set of measures around a prioritized set of SEL competencies. And those were growth mindset, self-efficacy, self-management, and social awareness. And so what they decided to do is they felt first we need to collect data on this to see where we're at. And so they created an index, which is really interesting. The index, which is based primarily on academic and then behavior measures. So the index itself is made up of about 60% academic measures and then 40% everything else. And everything else includes all the kind of behavioral indicators you would expect, culture climate data, and SEL, those SEL measures I mentioned. And that makes up about, the SEL makes up about 8%. So we worked with them throughout the years to curate a set of measures, working with Camille Farrington and Mitchell Duckworth, Carol Dweck, whose names I'm sure you've heard. Validated this with around 450,000 students. Today, they're using this index with around 1 million students. Now, the reason I mention this as some background context is that that's not so much the most interesting part. What's interesting is that you now have all these 9 or so districts with all this data. So the interesting part is what are they doing with the data? And what I've found fascinating is that for the most part, the districts have gone off and then done their own innovative efforts around SEL. So for example, in Santa Ana, they've created a number of online professional development for their teachers around building knowledge, around practice and research for these competencies. In Fresno, they've created an internal SEL institute for their staff. And the one, I'll just be brief, but the biggest, most impressive one, in my opinion, has been with San Francisco. And we worked with them a little bit in developing this. But San Francisco, which is around 46,000 students, I believe, created recently and rolled out a SEL report card for PK to 5. And so in this report card, the teachers provide proficiency ratings on students in those 4 areas I mentioned: growth mindset, self-efficacy, self-management, and social awareness, which are also part of their standards. And we could debate, of course, whether or not this is a good move, right? Teachers rating students, that's a whole other discussion. But what's really impressive about this is that one major effort led to a number of impactful things. So, for example, they successfully then created a common language throughout the district. They made it very clear what was being prioritized with SEL. In the process of developing the report card, they involved a variety of parent groups throughout the district, who in turn asked for a family companion guide translated into 6 different languages. They included around 140 teachers to review these things. So they got a lot of district buy-in in the process. And the last thing I'd say is that this has led to a number of different professional development opportunities. and they're also starting now to see changes in practice. So whether we disagree or whatever with the actual rating aspect, the fact that they put together this report card culminated in all of these interesting, impactful impacts. So in terms of national efforts, I think this is for me, one of those ones.
Great, thanks for that very comprehensive example. So Rochelle, back to you for a sec, if you don't mind me posing yet another question. So when you hear about examples like this from San Francisco, what are you think about when you think about some of the most important ways that the ESE is currently working with districts to help districts shape their socio-emotional learning agenda? Like, in other words, ESE has been out front in shaping a priority for the agency, but sort of what's the translation function to district-facing work?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say that a few things. One, in terms of our agency focus as well, our aim is not just about what we're doing, but it's about how we're helping to promote systems and strategies that are creating safe, positive, healthy, culturally competent, and inclusive learning environments that address the varied needs of students and improve educational outcomes for all. So some of the ways that we're working with districts include through our Rethinking Discipline Professional Learning Network. We also have a number of grant programs that support some work in this realm. We have Safe and Supported Schools grant programs where districts can use a framework and self-assessment tool to identify what are the local urgent priorities and what steps are doable to take, and then how can those steps be assessed and measured and course adjustments made as needed along the way. I think we also believe it's very important to have districts learning from each other and taking on practices that are most helpful. So the Excel Network, Rennie, and others that are supporting networking and peer learning is also something that we support and encourage. And again, there are a number of other initiatives and ways we're interacting with districts to support the development of both social and academic learning throughout their work. I'm happy to talk about that.
Thank you very much, and we'll get back there in just a second, I promise. So Deb, back to you. What are some of the strategies that you and your district colleagues have implemented to align with some of the learning that you all pulled from that analysis of your attendance data in terms of, it sounds like you identified right away that some socio-emotional supports were needed. So what did you do next?
So along the way, we have developed and I've provided for you this evening our strategic framework. And if you turn to the back of that page, you'll see section 2.1, social emotional learning. We then took that particular strategic action plan and created a more developed action plan, which some of our key steps are to create a core SEL team at the district level and those at the building level. We're trying to create and vertically articulate what social emotional learning developmentally looks like, pre-K to 12, how a skill of independence for a preschooler can be identified, and how we would see that independence develop as these children develop to be seniors in high school. We are also, with some subcommittees, working on developing for teachers a grade level understanding of what it might look like to have a child who has the castle of competencies. And we're looking to integrate our work into the types of lessons and curriculum that are in the classroom. We are a very inclusive district. We try not to pull out students at every juncture. We push in, whether it's our related service providers, whether it's our guidance counselors, we're trying to do the work in the classroom. We really try to prevent students from having what we would call a clicker experience, where they're going in and out and in and out of the classroom, and they're really missing out on the continuity of the instruction. And if you're already with challenges, I think that makes it that much harder. It also identifies you and calls you out to everybody. When our providers are in the classroom, they are working with all students, and we're finding that to be social emotionally supportive to everyone, and at the same time, it's actually creating, as Gower would say, that skillful teaching, that working together in the moment, and not requiring the staff to go out to professional development, but rather to in vitro look at those students and work with each other and find new ways and tools to service. So I have added one other thing on the back of the action plan, and it does describe, obviously, we adhere to the CAST, what we expect as a guidance to our teachers for appropriate social emotional, sorry, this doesn't work, social emotional skills for to define. Define these things at each grade level. We hope that each student in our school has a school experience that leads them to gains in the areas of self-regulation, self-confidence, resilience, leadership, communications, perspective-taking, building relationships, and having empathy. As we're pulling our SEL professionals together to guide the district in building this work, we have trained all of our administrators, and we eventually trained almost all, and we're still working on this, our district staff in collaborative problem solving. We wanted them to have real tools to communicate and talk with children in effective ways, and to be able to problem solve rather than just react. We have worked very, very hard on having zero restraints, zero suspensions. We have built a homeschool interventionist position and a home-based program, and so we're able to, if children have difficulties, provide for them in our school and not have them out of school, never missing any academic time. And I can report that our numbers are pretty good. Our data shows that we're not restraining. We say we don't restrain, and we don't. We say we don't suspend, and we don't. I mean, I think we're at less than 1% in those areas of having those more reactive or punishing types of responses. We're really proactively trying to teach our children and look at their mistakes as, or their behaviors as ways that we have deficits that need to be changed, and to give them skills that they may not have otherwise been taught, or if they're taught, they might go to an ed plan to get a remedial specialized instruction in some of those areas where they're struggling social emotionally. So the other thing that I did want to point out to you is that in our district, our students seem to be, it doesn't mean we don't have bullying or harassment or teasing or anything else like every other district, but we are finding that we're listening to our families and our children. The moment they're coming forward, we really encourage them to come forward, even though they're listening, and even if they will identify it as bullying, and it may not really be, but to come forward so that we can respond to issues very quickly rather than after they've really grown to be much bigger, major issues that are not as easily resolved. So those are the types of things that we're doing, the strategies that we've put in place, and the direction that we're going in the future.
And before you all move away from that excellent handout that Deb put together for your review tonight, on the back bottom page, there's actually a sort of information about how Canton Public Schools has organized their RTI, or Response to Intervention plan. Many of you are familiar with these notions of different tiers that organize instruction for different student skills and capabilities. Many times schools have both an academic and socio-emotional learning articulation of these. Canton does. So just to call your attention to how they sort of thought about how to address socio-emotional learning needs in the same way that academic learning needs would be organized across the 3 tiers. We just wanted to highlight that as sort of an excellent articulation of how to sort of, again, prioritize socio-emotional learning and blur that line between the academic and the socio-emotional. So I'm going to move back to Richard and pose another question. Here we go. When you think about the highest leverage strategies for districts to implement SEL, what comes to mind? And if you had to say, what do you think is the role for community in this work in supporting schools?
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, I wish I had brought handouts. This is great. Also, my last response you said was very comprehensive. Does that mean I talked too long, or does that mean it's actually...
No, that's it. It's very comprehensive.
Okay, so just a couple thoughts. I told this story actually at our last Excel session. This summer I was in New Jersey and in a district, and I was doing an observation, and so I went into the classroom with my protocol, whatever. And this teacher looked at me and said, "Oh, I wish you had come yesterday, because yesterday I was doing SEL." And I thought, you know, okay. But my point here is that one of the biggest challenges I think that we face is that educators, and this includes me and probably many of us in here, we still think of SEL as something separate from academics and everything else, when in actuality it's in everything that we do, it's in every interaction that we have, it's in our personal life, it's in our work life. And so one of the highest leverage strategies that I've seen has been with districts who have made a commitment to improve these SE skills in all students and not try to fraction their efforts. One of the ways that they've done this, and I've seen this in some of the core districts as well as some other districts that we've worked with, is that they didn't confine SEL to the pupil services department or the special ed department or some other department. Instead, they ensured that the groups collaborated. So most important, in my opinion, was getting anyone's department or office of instruction involved. To me, to not have the Department of Instruction involved in all these other efforts doesn't really make a lot of sense if you're planning to help improve these skills on every student. The other thing I'd say is, along with that comes what I've often referred to as intentionality. So if you think about, I spent a lot of my work studying school culture and citizenship and things like that. And when we think about school culture, we all know school culture is extremely hard to dictate, right? And yet every school has one. Every organization has one. The question I always ask is, are you intentional about what this culture looks like? Are you aware of what it looks like? And then are you trying to move it in a certain way, in a way that's best for kids? It's the same thing I feel like with SEL. So the districts that I've seen be very intentional about it and send this message to the teachers who are obviously the resident experts in the classroom have had more success. When I mean that, to give you like a concrete example, well, I'll just use my own self. So when I taught, I was a history teacher. I often did a seminar on Vietnam War. I did a seminar on the Holocaust. When I think back to those days, it was very easy in some of those cases, in those particular classes, to draw up social perspective taking, empathy, and other emotions and other skills. But to me, if I garnered any kind of if I improved students in those ways, it was sort of a bonus, right? If I went back to teach now, I would have been far more explicit about that. I would have reinforced it, and I would have thought about a way that I could maybe kind of get a sense of whether or not it was growing in these students. So that's what I think of when I think of intentionality. And the last thing I'll say is that, and I'll get to the community question, sorry, but SEL data and using data in a formative way has been another really high leverage strategy. And in part because I think it gives schools a real look at what they're actually doing. When we think of SEL, often I think it can be sort of fluffy, and so we think, well, you know, I think people have good relationships in our schools. But that might not be the case, particularly from the student's perspective. And I'll just give one example. When I was in Fresno, I sat down with an middle school principal who was very excited to see the data because their school has been for the last 3 years very, very dedicated to growth mindset. And so when she saw for her 800 students or so reports on their perspective on their own growth mindset, which was extremely low, she had to revisit the kinds of policies they had in place and the practices. So they were completely wrong about what they thought was going on, which of course she was very happy to hear to an extent. But it was obviously very helpful. In terms of community, that's obviously a very tough one. But you know, thinking a lot about Karen Mapp's work and how we can engage families in a number of different areas, I would just say that some of the most successful examples I've seen have been when districts are openly sharing and being transparent about this data with parents. They're involving parents in the prioritization process. And in the case of San Francisco, for example, the report card, parents now have a sense of what teachers are looking for in their students, and that has led to parent groups who are looking at the kinds of practices they're doing in the home and how those align with the school. And hopefully, the various practitioners in the district will be listening to the parents as well. But that's a really tough question. I mean, I think we don't have a good answer for it, but there's a number of different examples.
So in the interest of moving to full audience Q&A for learning purposes, so we can really sort of tap the expertise that we have in the room, I'm going to sort of ask for one more quick question. I'm actually going to go to Deb on this one, but then we'll be moving shortly to Q&A. So Deb, just to sort of close this out tonight, I know that the Canton Public Schools has a practice they are quite proud of, and that is the home visiting connection that you all have built. So maybe you could, we have a little guest star in our audience tonight who's actually the coordinator of the program, who's here, Kathy DeMazzi, who's going to talk a little bit about how they've used home visit program and talk a little bit about how it's supported their socio-emotional learning needs. Okay, and we're going to turn it over to Kathy.
I thought I was going to get it, but I'm hoping you'll enjoy it. Good evening. My name is Catherine DeMassi. I'm a LICSW, a clinical social worker with the Canton Public Schools. And I guess I'm just going to keep talking. That's right? Okay. So I can only imagine the frustration of our kids sometimes when technology doesn't work. So for the last 3 years, Ms. Bromfield had basically asked me to play in the sand. She said, we want to develop a social emotional program within the Canton Public Schools. Help us do that. So one of the things that we decided on was to create the role of a homeschool interventionist. What does that mean? That is me going into homes, working with children and families in their homes, as well as working with them in the classroom. It takes on a lot of different ideas. So a couple things that we do as a homeschool interventionist: yes, we are clinical social workers, so we address sick needs. If we have families that need shelter, clothing, food, internet service, those sort of things, that's something that depends on where I stand. But those are the things that we immediately address. Other things are a family in crisis, loss of a family member. We're the first to respond. In Canton, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we've actually lost a number of students. So the homeschool interventionist would go in, work with the family, help set things up, provide resources and support. Another big thing that we do is we help with mental health issues. So it was brought up tonight, we have, I consider a mental health crisis in the state of Massachusetts with the number of kids who are experiencing anxiety, depression, school refusal, school phobia. That's my job. So oftentimes, actually, when a child is absent 5 days in our school system, I'm put on alert. I then go into the schools. And basically what I say to the families, because I know we all know about CRAs and probation officers and filing with the courts, is I say, I'm the last friendly face from the school to come in and assist you. And I have to tell you, I've never had a family say no. I sit with the family, sometimes it's in the evening, sometimes it's during the day. I triage what the needs are of the family and the students, trying to figure out why it is that they're not coming to school, and then help them get those resources. A lot of times when we have children who are hospitalized with parent permission, I'll go into the hospitals and work with the teams. We're able to then come out of the hospital with a really good plan, not just a checklist of those coping skills that other folks think that we can use in our school. I'll basically say to the hospital, this is what we can do as a school. Help me figure out what the child needs. Attendance issues. So let me get back to that for a minute, because school refusal is huge. We had a real big challenge. So when I showed up in Canton, we had kids that were missing a number of days, and really people couldn't figure out why. And sure, we'd file, with the courts and things like that, but we really weren't helping families. And a lot of these students, it wasn't truancy, it was mental health issues. So what do I do besides go into the home? I make recommendations. I'll help them access community places like Riverside, that happens to be, I think, Wayside's up here. But I'll work with Riverside. I'll meet with them. I'll help them do the crisis intervention piece. I'll hang in there and help them get stabilized as a family. And then what I'll do is figure out what can we do to get this child back into school and make things comfortable. So here's the really neat part. I was given the opportunity to create something that we call a home-based setting. Home base is used to transition children back from hospitals, to work with kids who might have school phobia or school refusal. We use it for students who might be really struggling with, again, anxiety, depression, suicide ideation. We keep these kids in our school in this setting. We also use it for students who might have experienced trauma or grief. And the real neat part is that every child that comes in, we develop an individual plan. There's no cookie-cutter method, and I'm well supported in this area. A couple fascinating things that we have is I actually have a robot, and I put the robot up into the classroom, and I'm able to live stream the actual class, the actual teacher, and the students down to our home-based setting. So the student then is actually getting educated, but what we're using this tool is to desensitize kids with the anxiety issue of getting them to gradually move from home to home-based and then to the classroom. Once we feel as though they've been stabilized in home-based, then I work to transition them into the classroom. I'm working in the classroom as a push-in with other counselors, with teachers. So think about it, we're able to educate not only the teacher around that student, but other students in the class who might be suffering from those things. One last thing is we've set up Google Classroom. I know that's nothing new, but with our home base, I open it up to the teachers of the students who are in our home base. The neat part about it is if we hospitalize a child, I'm able to open up our Google Classroom to that child in the hospital. So that child in the hospital then is getting the social emotional support that they need. I'm going in on a periodic basis working with the team, and then they're also getting educated, and I and the teachers are able to view them through our Google Classroom. So a couple key things, and I know we got 30 seconds, is that a big part of my job is really connecting families with what it is that they need, being the bridge to our school, wherever those childs are, helping the families address their social emotional needs as well as the students. And the real neat part about it is you don't need a plan. You don't need a plan to get into our home-based setting. You don't need an IEP, you don't need a 504, I happen to be the 504 coordinator too, but you don't need those things, and you don't need those things to get the services from a homeschool interventionist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So as promised, we want to make sure to engage all of you in this conversation as well, so maybe we can take a few questions. Yes. I saw a hand behind you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought we were going to get up on the mic, but however you want to do it. That's great. Thanks.
Oh, hey, thanks so much for hosting this and for everyone being here. I'm really excited and impressed. My name is Amanda Shepard from Framingham, And I was really inspired about some of the work I'm hearing about the SEL development, specifically in California. I'm actually wearing an Oakland shirt right now, so it's my adopted home state. Specifically, what have educators and policymakers across the nation and in our local communities done to develop social emotional learning through the use of Viola Spolin's theater games, or otherwise known as improv education in the classrooms? Viola Spolin revolutionized this work back in the 20s, and we've had all sorts of great things ever since. I'd like to hear comments about that, please. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I will say that I have been into a couple schools. I don't know if it's follows this particular person that you cited exactly, but there have been definitely schools and districts that I've been to that use both theater and the improv strategy for a number of, in fact, many of you may have heard of the Breakthrough Magnet School in Connecticut. They're focused exclusively on mindfulness, and some of the teachers there have engaged in some of these kinds of strategies. But they've popped up from time to time. In terms of, from a sort of national policy perspective, I don't think it, as far as I know, it's not, you know, on anyone's radar in terms of like, you know, state effort or federal effort or anything like that. But that does pop up from time to time in the districts that I've seen.
Yes, I'm going to get to you with the mic.
Hi, so I was struck, Richard, by your comment about when you specifically talked about, you know, examples of curriculum that we use and how to embed these skills into the curriculum. And I think, you know, hearing everything tonight, I think a lot of our districts are doing some wonderful things with our kids who are identified. It's about being proactive and you know, explicitly teaching these skills. So I wonder from a state level if there's any discussion about looking at our state frameworks and embedding this somehow and making this be a priority with some accountability.
Michelle, I think that one's for you.
I think I'll So there are a few things that I'll just briefly say. Happy to talk with you more later if you'd like. But one thing is that the department will be taking on revisions to our much outdated comprehensive health curriculum frameworks, which include social emotional learning currently as a strand. And so we will be engaging with the field over the next several years. We're planning at this point the time and the process, the timing and process. But that's one way that we'll be taking this on. Another is that we did add in our guiding principles in the mathematics and English language arts and literacy revised curriculum frameworks recently, a guiding principle explicitly focused on pointing to the effectiveness of integrating social and emotional learning into sort of broader math and ELA sort of content and standards. And we've also, in our revised guidelines on implementing social emotional learning curricula, added some examples that we'll elaborate on and increase over time that specifically speak to ways that educators can integrate the development of social emotional competencies into core curriculum. So those are just a few ways. And with other curriculum frameworks that we're revising, we're taking it on similarly.
Great, thank you very much for that information. Is that other questions?
Thank you. Joan Shaughnessy from Holliston. I have to ask, the Canton, what I heard you say is that you created this position, this at-home position. I get the model, I understand it. How on God's green earth did you pay for it? Actually, not the budget chair?
Actually, it was
You're going to deal.
a blessing that I had from the school committee and the superintendents that I worked for. I lobbied hard, and I started with one, and that was Kathy, and we now actually have one at every level, and we continue to build our model. I said, take a chance with the pilot and let me see if I can show you some results. And as the results poured in, I think the dollars that continue to follow.
So, Deb, we're just going to ask you, who just walking to you with a mic, just folks in the back had a little trouble hearing. So just to recap, she started with 1 position, she now has 3, but maybe you could say a little bit more.
Can I just dig in? And I could probably clarify with the follow-up question. Please. So were these FTEs, were these recs, again, I'm sorry, I'm a budget lady, were these FTEs that were already in the system were they social workers that were already employees of the system? These were positions that were added to the Canton Public Schools. So I guess my question is more for an administrator, I suppose, like, and where in the budget did you come up with that?
So I've been in this position for, not at Canton, but also at SNO for many, many years. And I have learned how to re-engineer, and I've learned how to be creative, and I've learned how to shuffle, and I've learned how to ask. And so sometimes through asks, I got the position. Sometimes I actually re-engineered positions and got FTEs. But slowly and surely, I went from pilots. Whenever I have an idea, I try to pilot it and show its worth and value, or ditch it quickly if it isn't working. And that's how I made that happen. I have, used grant money at times to be a seed. The 274 grant, which unfortunately isn't around right now, at least for some districts. It is a mechanism that helped to bring a lot of professional development. That was a like to see go. But it is hard because you have to pick and choose sometimes between what kinds of service and where you're going to be investing your money and where you're going to get the district to give you those FTEs or dollars. And sometimes it's just bringing back a few kids, or your average districts change, or the need grows and you have to build that program. So it's a little bit of everything. But I guess I would suggest for any district looking to do something like this, if you have a chance at least to try one, even part of one, homeschool interventionist, that might be a way to see, does that model work for you? Are you able to do some things? I have this philosophy that 100% attendance 100% of the time with 100% engagement means that we have a chance of educating all children. And so I strive for that through this model of making sure that we have the children there, and the only way we can get them there is that they feel safe and comfortable and are able to engage in their learning. So I've been using that as my sales pitch for many, many years, and as I said, I've been very blessed that I've had superintendents and school committees that have taken those risks with me and allowed us to do these things, and now they're helping me to grow these programs.
Everyone, good evening. Gabby Abrams from the Medway Public Schools. Thanks to everyone for your commitment to this really, really important topic. A shout out to Richard, who we met last year during a Tri-County Roundtable, Superintendent Roundtable meeting, and I was equally impressed with the work of transforming education at that time. I think that you are operationalizing something that's really hard to operationalize, and we really need that in our work. So, and thanks to Canton for your exemplar, because I think that we need to do a lot more sharing. So that goes to my question for Rochelle. I'm wondering if the department has given some consideration to collecting some sort of systemic way to collect these models of practices throughout the Commonwealth. There's brilliant work happening in districts. And a lot of the leaders in this work are spending a great deal of time kind of digging around for those models of practice, because it's really hard to operationalize. Our educators, research says our educators need around 50 hours of professional development in order to shift their practice, and our leaders should be spending that time, that valuable time, developing their educators to do this meaningful work, and instead we're kind of digging a lot. And I'm wondering if there are some structures the department can help us with to really structure some of these models that are existing, these best practices, without necessarily saying this is what we should be doing, but this is the work that's happening across the Commonwealth, so we can really benefit from the expertise of each other across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a few things to say. One is it's a great question and something we've been grappling with for years. and you certainly haven't figured it all out. I think we appreciate, as I mentioned before, some partnering entities that are helping to do that kind of work, like Transforming Ed and the Rennie Center. We have, through some of our grant programs, made efforts to collect and continue to engage in the collection of some promising practices. Some of those can be shared on the website. So, for example, through our wraparound zone initiative that was mentioned at the beginning that Fall River had participated in, there's something called like a cookbook that has recipes of some promising practices in that realm. We have another iteration of that wraparound zone work. We have a Systems for Student Success Office and some grants. Actually, Framingham is one of the grantees recently awarded, and will be engaging in some of that work to be addressing barriers to learning, coming up with systemic promising practices, and then sharing them. And we have other grant programs as well, and our work with the Safe and Supportive Schools Commission is also aiming to increasingly provide examples of promising practice, again, with in-person networking as well as online. So the last thing I'll say is, so for example, that one of our professional development sessions just within the last few days, and we had districts with a case consultancy model sharing about some challenges and then hearing from peers about ways to address it, and some presentations. So there's a number of different ways where we're trying to take that on, but we welcome brainstorming with you and others in terms of how we can do that better.
Just getting back to the question you had asked, that the organization that Senator Spilka was mentioning is the statewide advocacy group, is the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts. I'm the executive director, and it's SEL4ma.org. And it's free for anyone to join. We've got people all around the Commonwealth who are advocating in their own communities and across the state for a high quality SEL in every community. The question that I wanted to ask was, when you were mentioning, Jennifer or Richard, when you were talking about Excel, can you say a little bit more about what the Excel network provides to the communities that take part? And I'm wondering that there are the 9 communities currently taking part, and are there any plans to make it available to additional communities?
Sure, and Jen, jump in whenever. The first part of your question was around, when you say community, do you mean are you talking about the specific districts or the communities surrounding those districts? Or,
The 9 districts.
oh, the 9 districts. Sorry, I forgot the first part of your question, but the second part of your question, I would say.
What does it provide to those districts?
What does it provide? The Excel network? Gotcha. So, in part, we launched this in part based off this Carnegie model around a network improvement community. So the idea is, right, that you're bringing in a number of different districts that focus on a similar aim. In this case, the aim really is to embed and integrate SEL in every classroom, every single student. So we're looking at basically a 3-year process. We started with 1 year, and the first year is really all about planning. The idea with the network, though, is that obviously individual districts have their own needs that they need to address. But the idea, particularly on the Carnegie model, is that you can leverage and actually work faster when learning from successes, challenges, and other lessons learned from your fellow peers within that large network, right? And so there's a lot more components to that, but essentially that's one of the most powerful aspects of it. Jen, you go ahead and jump in if you'd like.
So the notion here, you covered the basics: planning for a year, peer-to-peer support, the exploration of culture, climate, trauma, behavior, things that a lot of the districts who join us are bringing expertise on, and how do you sort of merge that and leverage it into SEL classroom integration. Years 2 and 3 would really, should they be funded, focus on measurement techniques and how to sort of really kick that into high with some of the growth. I'm going to call time on this discussion and ask if we can follow up later, just so we can fit in one last question. And Pooja has the mic, and she would be happy to sort of take one, and then we're going to close.
So we did 2 last questions?
Your call.
Hi, my name is Brian Prescott. I'm at Hopkinton High School. I just want to thank you all for the conference. This has been very enlightening. And I had a question for Richard Fournier, and I want to follow up on what the senator was saying about kind of teaching adults about social and emotional learning. And I thought it was very interesting what you said about San Francisco having a social and emotional learning report card. And I wasn't sure if you had any insight about helping teachers understand a standard for social and emotional learning, or what type of hurdles you faced or they faced in that district, coming up with a report card for SEL. Thank you very much.
Great. No, it's a great question. Thank you. So I can refer to San Francisco, but I'm going to talk in general with a lot of our partnerships. I've been working at TransferMed for about 2 years, and when I first started, I was very focused on students, right, children. And by the second year, I realized, wait, actually, most of our work is with the adults. In particular, when you start looking at the details of some of these competencies, and you look at the neuroscience behind them, and the education research behind it, the psychology behind it, you can't teach, it's hard to teach growth mindset or to help build that mindset if you yourself do not have a growth mindset, right? So I often use this example, but when I was a history teacher, I, for years, have, by the way, thought that I was really bad at math. I just felt I was naturally bad at math. And so I will be honest, I think I was a good teacher, but I probably passed on that notion to other students, and that's not good. And they probably carried that with them today. So I actually think a big part of this is definitely with knowledge building around adults. If I could choose anything in education to focus on with this mission, I would, if I had my wish, I would actually reform every ed prep program around the country, because I think that's actually what's sort of lacking around the nation. Not in every university, of course, but in many of the programs. And just quickly, I'll just say that these districts like San Francisco are aware of that, and so they're incorporating as much knowledge building as they possibly can. But as you know, that's tough, right? Because you need some buy-in for that. You need good facilitators, some good professional development for that. And it gets tricky. But I totally hear your point. It's very insightful, because that's exactly one of the #1 issues. And so knowledge building is huge. I'm an adjunct at a local university, and I sometimes teach undergrads who are going to be teachers, and they're juniors usually, and I always ask them, what do you guys know about social emotional learning? What do you know about these skills? And often they say they know nothing. And it's not that particular college, it's all over the place. I see this at Harvard as well. So it's scary, because these are folks that are going to become teachers. And so we've got to do a better job, I think, nationally in higher ed as well.
So just to follow up with that one quick example of one of our districts, not Canton, that is part of the Excel network, brought to us the notion that they were administering ACEs. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that instrument, many nads in the head, but the notion that this instrument tracks adverse child experiences, how many have you had, when did they occur, and how that might shape your own socio-emotional competence. It's a pretty common practice to administer to students in school, especially students who have been victims of trauma, who have behavioral health diagnoses, who might have a special ed diagnoses of a particular type. One of the districts, again, in the Excel network, brought forth the notion that they are now doing this with their educators, right? To sort of have that same type of trauma, behavioral health, mental health, stressor, trigger, trauma conversation with their educators as a manner in which to really sort of model the kinds of more informed conversations they want to have about students' socio-emotional learning, growth, health, and skill building opportunities as an outgrowth of the ability to have that conversation with their educators. So I think the notion here is very prevalent. It's the question of how do we do the work together. And I told Pooja a minute ago that we could do one more question, so here we are. Last question of the night. Quick question.
Okay, thanks. I'll try. Thanks, Mary Holliston. So my question is for Deb. I'm just wondering, with schools and districts really working to be very cautious about the amount of testing or evaluations we're doing, yet we want to have a good assessment of sort of students' skill deficits or strengths and SEL skills, as well as to determine whether a school is in fact experiencing gains. I'm wondering what data points or assessments Canton is using in terms of their role.
I'm not sure at this point we're using any particular measures that, and I'm just trying to assume what you're referring to. Do you have a specific measure that you're thinking of?
No, I guess that's the question that a lot of districts are facing in an effort to not over-assess yet, being able to measure, like as you say, gains or progress or how to teach the various SEL skills. Wondering what Canton's doing in determining when their schools made a gain or when a student's made a gain in the area of SEL.
I think we're not there yet. I think that what we've been looking at is many more indicators, and I think that you can see some of the indicators of success. We're really looking at students engaged in class. We're hoping that there's a correlation, obviously, between them coming to school more and then them being more successful in the classroom. We're hoping to see if a child has difficulty with self-regulation, that we're seeing less incidents, so we track a lot of behaviors through our BCBAs. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm hoping that this is, but I sort of need to test with you. Is that what you're looking for?
I think that was helpful in the struggle that districts are facing around it. We can look at attendance data, restraint data, suspension data, but the overall sort of when you're looking at Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and the CASA skill development area, what tools I think our districts developing to help us determine where our overall population of students are with those skill areas.
And I think what you're addressing now is the next level of work that we're really looking to do, because I think that we've had those initial indicators. We've been trying to understand this. We're trying to create the professional development through the collaborative problem solving. We're trying to give teachers skills. So there are all of these things happening, but I don't think we're quite at that point where we really have identified for ourselves what will it look like if our 3-year-old needs to go to their 4-year-old class and they are showing those signs of independence, and we really are meeting in subcommittees trying to define those things, because we would like to stay away from a report card for that, but we would really like to be able to say this is what we think it should look like, and then get teachers to be able to talk about, does that child seem to be demonstrating those skills, and if so, are they looking, and what would it look like being 4-year-old ready and 5-year-old ready, and to sort of track that. But that's in development, in discussion in our district at this point.
Great, thank you very much for the excellent questions, your attentive participation. I'm actually going to turn it back over to Senator Spilka, who's going to close us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Could we give another round of applause to our terrific panel? To Jennifer, Deborah, Rochelle, and Richard. I just want to say I learned a lot, and I felt like each one of you brought a different perspective to this discussion and really helped give a full presentation. So I thank you. I hope all of you learned a lot as well and are taking some tools away with you, whether it be in your schools, in your communities, wherever it is with children. Maybe there's some use for adults as well, as some people have asked. And so I would like to just reiterate, if you have more thoughts and ideas as to where we can provide more resources for you, please let my office know, let Pooja know, let Dennis know, he's here as well, or just call up and speak to somebody. We are here as a resource for you, so please let us know, and we will start thinking and looking into our next workshop. But I just want to thank all of you for coming out. Again, thank the Framingham State and the Warren Center staff for being so terrific as well. I wish all of you a very happy, healthy 2018. Stay warm and dry. Spring will be here before we know it. Thank you very much.